Before getting started with today's episode, I'd like to thank the sponsors behind Web3 Deep Dive. Thank you to Merlin Chain. Merlin Chain is committed to empowering Bitcoin's native assets, protocols, and products on Layer 1 through its Layer 2 network to make Bitcoin fun again. Thank you to FreedomGPT. FreedomGPT is the app store for artificial intelligence that allows anyone to access any AI model. Finally, thanks to JTX Media for the video and audio production behind this podcast, based out of Austin, Texas. Hey everyone, welcome back to Web3 Deep Dive Podcast. I'm so excited to be speaking with Yat Siu. He is the co-founder of Animoca Brands. Let's get right to the interview. Hi Yat, how are you?
I'm great, and thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us again. I know the audience loves everything you say, so you are the first second-time guest that I'm having back.
It's a great privilege for me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so Yat, let's talk a little bit about Animoca and your role there, and then we can get into some questions.
I mean, I'm the chairman co-founder. I sort of originally set up the business, moving into the direction of NFTs back in 2017. Today, we actually have over 500 investments in the Web3 space. Generally, everything focused around NFTs and blockchain, gaming, culture and entertainment in the realm of Web3. But also, we have extensive investments in areas of sort of layer 1, layer 2 technologies as well that can help expand the space. Key projects of ours, you might have heard of a Sandbox or the Metaverse. Key investments that we probably are known for are early stage investments in companies like OpenSea or even Magic Eden, Yuga Labs, Cool Cats, and of course, all the various other sort of metaverse platforms that you've heard of out there, gaming projects like Pixels, for instance, and Axie Infinity. So that's us. We're a global operation, headquartered technically in Hong Kong, but I generally live on a plane, and I'm here in sunny Austin.
Yeah, and it is. It's sunny and nice, and I'm so happy you're here today. Let's talk a little bit about Hong Kong, because before we got started with this interview, you were telling me about the innovation there, and I'm curious to hear about how the Web3 sector is shaping up in Hong Kong.
I mean, I would say that Hong Kong is really trying to lead in Web3, not only sort of advancing it in the regulatory side, which they've got licensed exchange operators and so on, and you also have tokens that you can trade, and even the HKMA has sort of issued tokenized green bonds. But Hong Kong was also very early on Bitcoin spot ETF futures, and actually approved an Ethereum ETF ahead of the US, which is already trading. And what's really fascinating as well is that there's currently a conversation around allowing staking for essentially the Ethereum ETF partners in Hong Kong. So you can kind of see this interesting dynamic, right? Because Hong Kong isn't just doing it for the Hong Kong market. It's essentially one of the most important financial markets in the world, and certainly a center in Asia. And also there's a lot of capital coming from China as well that is interested in the space and exploring. And for the time being, I think Chinese mainland investors can't participate in those Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs, but that's basically, I think, one of the next potential market openings. So I think Hong Kong has always been that financial sandbox for China in the region. In contrast to maybe other markets right now, although it's interesting to see how the US is now accelerated as well. So I think it's generally sort of just positive signals around the development of Web3.
Do you know when the spot Ethereum ETF was passed in Hong Kong?
It was only about a month or so ago.
Oh, okay.
It was very, very recent.
Got it. So because in the US, it's not fully passed.
Correct. Yeah,
so that's why you're saying,
exactly.
Hong Kong moved faster than the United States.
Well, it not only approved it earlier, it also launched it earlier. And already, you can already buy it right now.
What would staking on a spot Ethereum ETF enable? And why is that such a big deal? Because I don't think that's going to happen in the United States.
Interesting question. Well, first of all, I think, when you think about the fact that you're owning essentially through within the ETF the asset, and when you stake the asset, there's sort of a yield that can be generated from the staking, then who owns that yield is the question, right? And I think the thing is that you can buy ETFs that generate yield. I mean, you've got fixed income and all that kind of stuff, for instance, that exists as ETFs. So why not necessarily for crypto? And I think one of the big debating points has been, as I understand it in the US, is that in order to get the approval, they had to remove staking. At least that's what I've been reading. I'm not in the midst of it. But again, it's a property essentially of the institution that basically issues. So why shouldn't they be entitled to the reward? And it's also something that secures the network. So there's a reason that you're staking, right? It's not something that's just, it's really not, I would say, speculative in nature, for instance. But again, I guess, I'm not a regulator, so I can't really truly comment on this, but I think Hong Kong is open towards that because I think they see the merits of this. And you can kind of also see how Hong Kong has been more progressive in the thinking around Web3. So for instance, the way that they're thinking about Web3, where you have a number of tokens that actually can be traded by retail, for instance, and the fact that they've got a progressive, I guess, exchange regulatory framework that they're building up on, shows that Hong Kong wants to lead in that space. And Hong Kong has always wanted to be, and hasn't historically been, a financial and fintech leader. And the history of both COVID and some of the problems in the past have sort of made it lose some of that position against other markets. And I think they really see this as an opportunity to sort of reclaim back their position. And I think they're doing a great job. And so many people have come to Hong Kong. And if you may not know, Consensus next year will also be in Hong Kong, which is, again, I think a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that is a big deal. It's interesting. So yesterday I had a conversation with James Seyfert. He's the ETF research analyst at Bloomberg. We were talking about ETFs. And one of the questions I asked him was, will there be another crypto ETF after Ethereum? And he said he does not think so in the United States. Do you think in Hong Kong another crypto ETF will happen?
I think so.
Interesting.
And the reason why I think that's the case is that because Hong Kong has already essentially opened up towards multiple tokens that they essentially have said they're okay essentially for sort of, I guess, retail participation. Which basically means that if you already sort of classify these tokens in the market as they were, which is a very different perspective that we have in the US, right, at least for the time being, then it opens up the ability to turn them into an ETF. An example, for instance, CF Benchmarks has actually last year issued a GameFi index of essentially, which was actually launched by a Hong Kong, a Hong Kong UK operator, of 20 GameFi tokens that they've put together, including tokens like Sand and ApeCoin and those ones, and it created an index, which is now currently quoted on Bloomberg. And that to me is, again, an indication of the next step on that would basically be to look and turn that potentially into an ETF, maybe of a basket of GameFi tokens. For instance, if you're an investor and you're interested in participating in, say, GameFi as a narrative, or it could be any other narrative that you're building out, it makes sense to do that as an ETF. And for investors to participate in that manner. Hong Kong has always been at the edge of that kind of financial innovation, so I see them trying to sort of continue to sort of do that. But also, it's not just Hong Kong, right? I mean, Japan is looking at it right now. I think there's conversations about it happening in the UK, and then there's also Europe, right? It's kind of like, well, why should the US have all the fun here in this case? And in fact, the missed opportunity that's happening in the US is actually the opportunity for elsewhere in the market, right? And I think I was on a talk in one of the spaces, actually, I think with James. And there was actually, no, maybe it wasn't James, but anyway, there was an interesting conversation around that, around how, the US is, I guess, an ETF monster, right? And so they are the biggest in the world. But when they're not able to do it, then it's an opportunity for other markets to take advantage of that and take a slice of that. And that's exactly what I see happening. So I totally expect not just Hong Kong, but other jurisdictions in the world to be launching different type of, Web3 crypto-related ETFs in whatever form, shape, or fashion in the coming future.
Right. A lot of people are hoping for the Solana ETF, so we'll see.
I mean, I think a lot of people are hoping for all sorts of ETFs, right?
Yeah.
But certainly, I can see why the Solana community would be very keen on that.
Right. Definitely.
I want to take this time to thank the sponsor behind Web3 Deep Dive podcast, Merlin Chain. Merlin Chain is a Bitcoin Layer 2 that integrates zero-knowledge rollup, decentralized Oracle network, and on-chain BTC fraud modules. Merlin Chain is committed to empowering Bitcoin native assets, protocols, and products on Layer 1 through its Layer 2 network to make Bitcoin fun again. Merlin Chain is a subsidiary product line of Bitmap Tech, a premier OG team boasting an overall market cap exceeding $500 million. The BRC 420 Blue Box collection under Bitmap Tech has become one of the hottest assets on Ordinals.
So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the Metaverse and gaming. What's going on there? I haven't covered the Metaverse or gaming in quite a while, so can you kind of update me?
Yeah, well, first of all, the gaming side has been really explosive. And to us, we think of gaming and Metaverse kind of connected in the same way that in the, I guess, Web 2 sort of metaverse, it's the gaming metaverses that are big, whether it's a Minecraft or whether it's a Roblox or whether it's a Fortnite. Like in Web 3, those narratives are now essentially run by, whether it's a Sandbox or Axie Infinity, which has really made a strong comeback, or Pixels, which is probably, I guess, the largest native Web3 game that's out there, right? And these are all part of the Animoca portfolio. And it's really made a big difference. It's interesting how just a few months ago, one of the headline articles at the New York Times was how crypto was making a roaring comeback in the Philippines. I think, I forget, I paraphrase this because I don't remember the exact sort of headline, but it was like, something like, what meltdown? Like it never kind of happened, which is really interesting because that same type of mainstream media a year ago declared the death of GameFi and basically said it all didn't work. And here we are, basically 1 year later, and it's come roaring back in full force. And the largest number of applications and DApp users actually are coming from Web3 gaming. But there's another ecosystem that we're really big on and sort of very supportive on that's emerging as perhaps the one point that I think can really create breakout potential. One of the challenges that Web3 games had, and just generally crypto adoption, was the distribution channels. I think the need and the applications have grown in spite of the resistance of these gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers are Apple and Facebook and Google and those platforms that aren't really sort of welcoming, I guess, Web3 applications, right? For instance, it was only until recently that Apple was even okay to have NFTs inside games. And then even then, when you have NFTs in the game, Apple would say, but you can't have utility. So what is the point in having the NFT when you can't have utility, for example, right? So they're creating all these weird restrictions. And Steam is the same. Steam has basically said, we're not okay if you do NFTs inside games. And Minecraft as well has said you can't have NFTs in your game. So you've got this sort of Web 2, I guess, resistance, the classic kind of sort of kingdoms that are saying we don't want this because I think it really threatens and undermines their model. But the distribution model that I think is at least near term going to sort of change all of that is Telegram. So with the Ton ecosystem, they've actually sort of opened up essentially their platform to actually have not just very low user acquisition, but essentially have a way in which you can reach large number of users with Web3 related content. And so we've been building a lot on Ton. Gamey is probably the largest, I guess, casual gaming environment on Ton. I think we've sort of signed up, I think, 20 or 30 million users through that recently. And it has 1.7 million daily active users, right? And then you kind of what you see with Notcoin, for instance, and other ecosystems that are building. To me, that's actually sort of taking over the classical distribution narratives that was missing in Web3. Now a platform like Telegram and Ton are sort of growing that. But it's also interesting because Telegram isn't very popular in America, even though it has 800 million users. Mm-hmm. So for people in the US, they're like, I've never heard of Telegram, for instance, right? I mean, again, it's not to say that in Web3, we've all heard about it. But outside of Web3, most people aren't sort of as familiar with it. So they don't sort of, they kind of dismiss it a little bit. But then when you go outside, it's the fastest growing and one of the most popular sort of communication mediums out there. So I think that's changing. So this year, the combination of all the new games that are coming out, we ourselves invested in over 150 games that are all launching, and then our own Mochaverse platform as well as helping sort of distribute and sort of publish these titles as well, together with platforms that we see like with Telegram and the Ton ecosystem. I think will really, onboard potentially, we've been saying this a lot, but I think we'll get to 100 million native Web3 users and growing, possibly even by this year.
Wow, that's a great prediction. And it's interesting you say that because I do think of Telegram and not everybody in the US knows about it, but I guess with Telegram being so popular outside of the United States, that could definitely be the bridge that we need to bring the Web 2 gamers into Web 3, I guess, with these games on Telegram. Yeah,
and I think it's also that you have to give people an experience of what a Web 3 game looks like and what it is like to have a wallet integration. And it's not straightforward when you think of it in the classic Web3 way. First of all, it's on a desktop PC, then you do install your wallet and so on. And again, it's not super difficult, but the onboarding does create a lot more friction that is unfamiliar for Web2 user. But I think the other thing that I also like about Telegram is that Telegram isn't just a community of people that are Web2 users. It has a really large group of Web3 users. So you actually already have a support network inside Telegram that kind of gets this. Right, and so I think we're quite bullish on that ecosystem, which is why we sort of invested and sort of participated in their growth, and also are building on top of it, amongst other things, right? And of course, you've got the more native ones, like what's happening with Ronin, that's really growing as well, and you've got the Immutable team, and you've got Polygon, right? They're all sort of helping build that narrative. So the other thing about what's happening in Web3 growth, it's not one party doing it. It's an entire ecosystem that have sort of really good incentives to essentially grow gaming and metaverse growth in that particular platform. So again, I'm super positive about where the space is going.
FreedomGPT is an app store for AI. FreedomGPT is most commonly known for its censor-free AI model called Liberty that answers literally any prompt you ask with an unbiased response. Unlike other AIs where controversial topics are off limits, FreedomGPT embraces the concept that you should be able to ask AI anything. Equally important, FreedomGPT has the option to be run locally on your computer so your data remains 100% private and secure. Check out FreedomGPT's over 80 AI models today.
What are your thoughts on the NFT ecosystem today? And I know I see often, and I get these press releases about these, is it the education NFTs that Animoca is doing?
Oh, I see. Well, yeah. So first of all, we're obviously big supporters of the NFT ecosystem, broadly speaking. Especially in Q1 this year, it's seen quite a big revival. A little bit of a pullback, but broadly speaking, we're still talking about a multi-billion-dollar growing market. So positive around that. Especially we see this activity in gaming. If you look at, for instance, our own Mochaverse NFT project, floor price ranges between 3.5 to 4 ETH. People forget that we launched this project maybe a little over a year ago at a nearly zero cost launch, right? And the fact that it is hovering at this level, especially given the fact that ETH is also slowly approaching potential all-time highs, is actually sort of telling that the industry is actually not doing so badly as some people might think, right? And even when people say, oh, but look at the prices of Bored Apes, for instance, maybe it looks like it's come down, but actually in dollar value, it's actually maintained itself because the value of ETH has gone up, while maybe the price the price in relative ETH might appear to be lower, right? So the space is continuing to grow, and of course you've got new contenders as well that are sort of shaping the market, like Pudgy Penguins, which wasn't really I guess in the Ethereum ecosystem, a main NFT collection, but clearly has emerged as one of the dominant NFT collections in the space as well. So it's become a more diverse market. And then you have to add, of course, what's happening with ordinals and the Bitcoin ecosystem and all the things that are happening with BRC and runes and so on. These are all things that didn't exist before, and they're adding to the narratives and adding to the growth and the diversity of the space. So that's very, very interesting. With Open Campus and what we did with TinyTap, we're particularly excited about demonstrating that NFTs have use cases, beyond, I guess, the status items and gaming utility. In fact, they become containers of intellectual property. And so I posit this sort of example. Imagine what the music industry would have looked like if we couldn't actually have intellectual property rights related to our music. We wouldn't have a music industry. There wouldn't be a Taylor Swift. She wouldn't be making the kind of money she's making in order to make the kind of music she's making and creating the kind of shows and entertainment she's creating, because she wouldn't have a way in which she could protect her intellectual property rights. But the problem about intellectual property rights protection in the traditional world is that it costs a lot of money to do that. You need lawyers, you need a contract, you need negotiations, and you need these organizations like ASCAP and so on that basically protect your music royalty rights and often abuse it. But on blockchain with NFTs, you can do the same kind of intellectual protection for less than $1, which means that you're not only enabling artists, whether they're artists or musicians or creators of all sorts, to protect the intellectual property that might only be worth $5 or $10, which you could then capitalize. We're doing this with teachers who essentially now are creating educational content, and they might make $10, $20, $30, or $100 a year on this, but now it becomes a capital asset because it's an NFT, which means they can sell it to someone and receive that value. And that's actually the beginning of how capital and wealth formation is created in history, right? Property rights in the physical world, like owning your house, gave you that enablement, and now we can do that in the digital space. And we've had teachers make literally several years of their salary essentially with the sale of these NFTs, really changing their life. And again, what's interesting is when those kind of community members make money, they actually put back into the ecosystem. And again, this is one of the wonderful things about the ethos of Web3 and crypto. Everyone who makes money in the space, sure, they might buy maybe some nicer shoes, or maybe they buy a house or something, but they always come back to the community. They don't take the money out and do something in the real world. They actually go and invest deeper in the digital world, right? They start buying this token, they start having fun here, they buy NFTs, right? And so to me, this is a similar phenomenon what happened in Silicon Valley. And I think this is one of the sort of examples of how I see the growth of the ecosystem, this sort of inevitability, because everyone who makes money in the space reinvests it back into it because they love it, they believe it, and they see the opportunity.
Right, I love that. That's great insights. Yeah, we're running low on time. Any additional comments or final comments before we say goodbye?
Well, I mean, look, I would say that I'm sort of really positive about what's happening in the Web3 space. One thing I'll sort of close on thinking, I think that when you look at the political shifts that we're seeing in America, which was really, really interesting, it tells me a different signal. It doesn't tell me just a signal that people might have sort of become more aware. It tells me that maybe even the American underbelly is actually much more pro-crypto than perhaps we assumed it was. Right? When you look at traditional media, you get one angle. But actually, why would there be so much bipartisan support for essentially, let's call it a Web3 crypto embracing bill that's trying to sort of create clarity around that, which I would argue that most people in America probably don't have a full understanding what this is, right? I mean, and so to me, I think that's a very, very positive signal that I think there's much more sort of, I guess, underlying support for the Web3 industry, even in a place like US than one would have assumed. And I think it means that in the coming years, I have full confidence that America might actually sort of reclaim its leadership in Web3 and blockchain, which it kind of lost a little bit because of the regulatory uncertainty. And the other thing I would also say is that I do think that Web3 crypto blockchain is potentially the great equalizer. And I don't mean that in the sense that everyone it's equal. I mean it in the sense that equal opportunity for things that we were hoping to achieve which we couldn't do in the physical world, which I think we can now do in Web3. And it's one of the reasons why I think the growth of this ecosystem is inevitable. And I go back to this example about, this new class of people in Web3 who are reinvesting in the space and growing in the space. They're actually, I guess, disruptors in their own way and creating a new change dynamic in the same way that these Silicon Valley entrepreneurs did that 20, 30 years ago. I just see it as history repeating itself. And like the Silicon Valley investors who basically angel investing in the space and helped grow the culture of that space, I see exactly the same paradigm in Web3. So just really, really positive about sort of this new mindset that we're seeing, this growth.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank the sponsors behind Web3 Deep Dive. You can click the links in the show notes to learn more about each of the Web3 initiatives from these sponsors. Finally, thanks to the listeners for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and share. I'll see you guys next time.